Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. My name is Sebastian Moore.
And I'm hilary.salt.
And we are coming off the back of another big week in politics.
Oh, everything's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, it was Gorton and Denton the last time that there was a sort of busy period for us certainly, where there's an election going on. And then off the back, it was suddenly, there was a load of things going on in the world of politics. I can't even remember what it was. I think it was Iran, Trump bombing Iran. And everyone forgot about Gorton and Denton. And I think it's the same with the local elections, isn't it? The way that now the local elections is kind of out of sight.
Yeah, everybody's got their mind on other things now, particularly the Labour leadership. Can't say it.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. So I'll be talking a little bit about that today.
Okay.
The Makerfield by-election and the ramifications of Andy Burnham potentially standing, the SDP potentially standing. Mm-hmm. And you'll be talking about?
I want to talk about house building.
Very good. We like house building.
Yes, we do. Yeah. So in some ways, this is a kind of bit of a follow-on piece from my talking about Greg's last week.
Oh, very good. Sequel. So go and listen to the Greg's episode if you haven't.
Yeah, because short selling comes into it again a little way down the line. But shall I start off with a bit of a background in terms of house building? So we've talked about house building on the podcast before, haven't we? Because it's one of the things that we think is one of the real problems in society is the lack of affordable housing. And the Labour government have, to their credit, a big target for house building. They wanted to build 1.5 million homes over the course of their 5-year parliamentary term. Who knows whether it'll be 5 years now, as it happens. So about 300,000 a year. They're actually building around about 200,000. So it's not that, I thought it was actually worse than that. Net new additions, I think, is the word they use. So these are not necessarily all new homes. They might be conversions of existing buildings or changing the configuration of an existing house. So,
or bringing disused buildings back into
correct.
use.
Yeah. So, but overall, the net new additions are around about 200,000. There are a number of policy levers that the government's established to push through additional house building. The first is mandatory local targets. The second is a change to the planning framework to encourage and prioritise building on brownfield sites. And the third is direct government subsidy of house building through, in England, Homes England. Now, on that mandatory local targets, people are some doing better and some doing worse against that. So I had a look at my council, for example, Trafford. I think their target's about 1,700 and they're building about 900. I checked Manchester. Manchester has a target of about 2,400 and it's broadly meeting that.
Yeah, I believe that there's 2 out of the 10 boroughs in Greater Manchester are meeting their targets.
Okay.
I want to say Salford is the other one. I think Manchester and Salford and all the other boroughs are not meeting their targets.
Okay. I did look at Wigan as well for reasons that will become clear.
Yes.
And they're not way off, I don't think, but they're not meeting their targets quite either. I think they had a 1,400 target and they're building 1,200, so they're not way out. By comparison, Kensington and Chelsea has a target of 5,000. Do you know how many? Do you want to guess how many they're building?
Oh, I really don't know, because they could have been putting up massive towers. So are they smashing the target?
No.
Quite the opposite. Go on.
200.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're way out. And, they've kind of pointed out that there are some challenges for them that perhaps other people don't have. It's quite a small borough, Kensington and Chelsea.
That just shows that this is a non-London podcast.
It does.
We know Greater Manchester.
Yeah.
We're not going to worry ourselves about London.
Yeah. So, what are the challenges to building houses, and what are the issues that house builders in particular are struggling with? Because the reason I want to cover this is there's been quite a bit of stuff in the news about one particular house builder, Vistry, which I'll come on to. But to start off with kind of generic issues for house builders, there's a number of challenges at the moment. One is, this is quite an interesting one, that there's a real move away from people wanting to live in flats, which might be a big shock to us in Manchester because that's all we see being built, isn't it? Massive flats. But I think there's a number of perhaps not entirely rational reasons. People worry about cladding, and that's not a worry in many flats. But also there's the exit of many of the buy-to-let landlords, and they tended to focus on flats. These are the kind of individuals maybe having a portfolio of 2 or 3 flats, and all of those people are leaving. I think partly because of the difficulties of making money out of it these days, but also the new Renters' Rights Act, which makes it a bit more tricky for the landlords to operate. So the exit of those means that, interestingly, the kind of balance between buying a flat and renting a flat is changing. But there is an issue in that a lot of the houses that were going to be built, or the homes that were going to be built, I should say, were going to be flats. And now there's a little bit of a question mark around whether that's the right way to go. So that's one challenge. There's other challenges. One is obviously rising costs. And we've talked about this for lots of employers, haven't we? Denby, Greggs and house builders. So the rising cost of employing people, additional NI, for example. The rising cost of raw materials for the building industry. So bricks, cement, all those kind of things tend to be high energy. They need a lot of energy to make. And so the rising cost of energy pushes up those prices. There's also the fact that borrowings are more expensive. So I don't know if you've noticed that a lot of the discussion, particularly around the leadership election, has been what's the effect on the gilt yield? That's the price that is charged by the markets to lend money to the UK government. And I think the gilt yield on 20-year gilts is about 5.7 now. It's quite a lot higher than it was. Now, when companies lend money from the market, they lend at something that's a bit more than what it costs to lend to government because they're riskier. So that gap, we call it the credit spread between what corporates can lend for and what government can lend for. Obviously, as the yield on gilts goes up, the yield that they have to pay on their debt goes up as well. So debt costs them more.
Yeah. Did you mean borrow when you said lend?
Oh, when they want to borrow money, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
It's a bit through me.
I think that's a Bolton thing, know.
Right,
We always got those two. Well, I think we use those interchangeably in Bolton.
Yeah, it's a bit like in Ireland. I'm sure they do the same where they use that interchangeably. Okay, that confused me, but I'm there now.
Can you borrow me that book?
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, in Bolton, we would say, can you borrow me that book? That's what we would say. So the cost of debt, the cost of the debt that they have has gone up quite a lot. So all those costs are a challenge. And the other problem that they're facing is that for those people who are about to buy a house, particularly first-time buyers, perhaps the fact that, we were expecting maybe more rate cuts from the Bank of England, and we're probably not now because we think inflation is going to edge up more. So the prospect of more lending rate cuts is probably vanishingly small now. So perhaps people who were about to commit to a mortgage maybe aren't doing, and so sales are a bit sluggish. Now, that's an additional problem because obviously private sector house builders, but they want to build houses and get them off into the market and sold so that they can then use that money as part of their cash flow. So those are all the problems that are facing house builders generally. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Vistry, which is it's often called Labour's favourite house builder. Other house builders are available, of course. Have you heard of Vistry?
Well, you mentioned that you were going to do this on the podcast, and I thought, I've not heard of Vistry, but they trade under different names.
They do.
I had heard of some of the other names.
Yeah, you'll know their brands like Bovis and Countryside. I think you'll have seen Linden Housing. I think you'll have seen those, I'm sure. So this is, one of the big house builders anyway, and it has been really struggling this year. Its share price has gone down by about 50%. And all those things that we talked about already are the challenges it's facing, but it also has a couple of other specific ones. There have been apparently some errors in their cost forecasting. and their chief exec resigned last week. So all those things are additional challenges for it. And it's another company where there's a lot of short selling going on. So we talked about this last week. This is where investors, they borrow stock from another investor, sell that stock on the market because they think that the price of that stock's going to go down. And when the price goes down, they'll then buy it back in the market and give it back to the person that they lent it off. So
betting against it, basically.
Yeah, it's betting, yeah. So there are, I think it's about something like 12% of the stock is being borrowed to facilitate that kind of short selling. So that's another problem for it. So its share price has fallen really significantly. And the Times was reporting over the weekend that they've actually instructed their subcontractors to stop building because they want to keep as much cash as they can in the business and not spend it on, outlay for the actual building that's meant to be going on. So anything that's they've not sold yet, or that's not due to be sold until after June, they have, according to the Times anyway, instructed the contractors to stop building.
Isn't that a vicious circle? Because then they're stopping doing anything which is good, and it's going to cause the market to think that they're.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in market confidence, it's problematic. But the reason why they might do it is because they want to keep cash in the business. Now,
which the market might then recognise as a sensible thing to do.
Yeah. So I would say the reason why they maybe want to keep cash in the business is because they'll have a lot of what we call banking covenants. So you're looking at me like I've said something foreign there. So they'll have agreed the terms on which they can loan money from probably quite a lot of different banking organisations, and that we call that the banking covenants, the promises it's made to back up the lending that it has. This is not necessarily long-term lending. This is maybe lending from banks to cover more short-term, cash flow issues. Now, I don't know what Vistry's banking covenants look like, but typically your banking covenant might say something like you can't, your borrowing in total can't exceed 50% of your market capitalisation. So if you look at the price of Vistry's shares, you look at the number of shares it has and multiply those together, that's the market capitalisation of the business. And the banking covenant might say your debt can't ever go above 50% of that, let's say. Now, the problem then for an organisation is that if their share price is going down quite a lot, they might have thought they had a lot of headroom against that banking covenant, but all of a sudden it all goes as their share price falls. So if they're suddenly scrabbling around thinking, we're going to fail our banking covenants, they then need to keep cash in the business. So that might be the reason why they're saying, let's not spend any more money in the short term. Let's, make sure that we just keep cash in house. One of the other things they've done is they were one of the organisations that used to return money to shareholders using what we call a share buyback. So every year there'd be a kind of like a lottery of the shares. And then if you held one of those shares, they would repay you, they'd buy it back off you. So part of your return as an investor on the shares came through the share buyback. It's something they do a lot more in America than here, but it's something that is a feature for some organisations here. And because they want to keep money in the business, they've said they're not going to do any more share buybacks, which again pushes their share price down. So a lot of these things are really hard to kind of balance out against each other and know what the right thing to do is. It's all the tricky things about running a business. So things are pretty tricky, I would say, for Vistry. And I mean, I'm only saying that this is what the Times is reporting. I don't think we have any hard evidence of them saying that that the people should stop work, but presumably they have a reasonable basis on which to write that article. They've also just mentioned, and I wonder whether this is just a bit they're just trying to kind of over-egg the cake a bit. They said there's a number of the joint ventures that Vistry is involved with that haven't filed their accounts. Now, not filing your accounts is serious, but it does happen from time to time. And they've mentioned a couple of these joint ventures. So this is where Vistry doesn't build the houses as an organisation on its own. It has a joint venture with maybe a housing association or another developer. And they have a joint co that actually runs that business. But, it's not a good thing. It's not a good sign that they've not filed accounts. So whilst, you don't want to add to panic in the market, it does feel like there's some things that Vistry needs to be sorting out. But, at the end of the day, Labour's favourite house builder and all that, and the government have still got, I think it's £39 billion to spend on these the Homes England.
So that's money that they've set aside for house building.
Correct.
And they are putting it through bodies like Homes England.
Yeah.
Which, when a developer builds a new development, they'll say, right, we'll offer you, if you build that development and make 40% of it affordable or whatever, we'll give you this amount of money. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Now with Vistry, I think about 30% of its homes are built to sell to the private market. So they'll build and they'll sell it to somebody who wants to buy a house. The other 2/3 is actually directly work for things like social housing and local authorities and private landlords. So, all that worry about who I'm going to sell the house to is only to a third of their portfolio, but it looks like that's where they make a lot of their money, which is why the profit warnings and the fact that they've signalled to the market that they expect their profits to be impacted.
I don't understand that 2/3 is going to what? Because if you say social housing, it doesn't seem like the government is building any social housing.
No, but social housing organisations build their own houses.
Housing associations?
Housing associations build new houses.
And you think 2/3 of what Vistry are building is going to things like that?
Correct. Yeah.
That really surprises me.
Yeah, well, that's that 39 billion to spend that the government is using to pump prime. That's excluding any money that the housing associations themselves might have to spend on house building. There's a lot of money in house building. It's a risky business, but there's a lot to do. So, where am I ending up on all this? I think one of the reasons I wanted to cover it was just to make the point that we often think about house building as something that's like over there, and it's a really important thing. And if we could just train enough people, and that's not, I'm not saying we shouldn't be training enough people. That is something we need to do, but just that on its own doesn't solve the housing problem. And if it is going to be private developers who do a lot of house building, we do have to understand that a lot of these issues like gilt yields, rising cost of materials, people being unwilling to buy houses, all those things, there's a kind of really big interwoven lot of issues that affect how house builders operate. And it's a very interconnected world. Is, I guess, the point I think is important to hold on to.
So what we say as social democrats who believe that when there is a public good, it shouldn't necessarily just be left to the market. What would we say in relation to house building?
I mean, this I would say underlines the idea that just leaving it all to the market makes it quite unpredictable and volatile. Now, it's not to say that the state would not have some of the same problems, because it would still be facing the problems of the rising cost of materials. But the state has more levers to pull, and the state isn't subject to banking covenants that really restrict what it can do. So I would say this is another thing that pushes or bolsters our argument that we need to have more state house building.
And would you say that 39 billion that Homes England currently has would be better spent just building houses rather than funneling it through for private developers?
I always think a mixed economy is quite helpful. So, maybe using some of it to ensure that the private sector the private sector house builders do some of it. I don't think it's a bad thing, but certainly having more state house building, I think, would be sensible. So that's house building.
Brilliant.
And I think there were a couple of things there that overlapped with some of the issues that you want to talk about in terms of Labour leadership and the by-election and where we're going with all that.
Yeah, let's have a quick rundown if anybody's been offline for the last 10 days. So 10 days ago exactly, from when we're recording, the results of the council elections all across the country were coming out. And we were there at our respective counts, hearing the results be announced. And as expected, it was a pasting for the Labour Party. And some were even expecting a worse result than they had, and they lost about 1,400 seats, was it? Or maybe that's what Reform got. But
I lost count.
Yeah, it's already in the distance, isn't it? But anyway, there's as we sort of thought might happen, there were some challenges to Keir Starmer following the local elections, and many MPs. It was being reported that over 100 MPs had signed a letter saying that they wanted Keir Starmer to resign or wanted a leadership election. In and amongst that, a few ministers quit, the biggest name of which was Wes Streeting, of course, the Health Secretary. And this came on the same day, last Thursday, as Angela Rayner was cleared of any wrongdoing in her tax affairs.
That felt so
6 o'clock in the morning.
Coincidental. Could not be a coincidence, that could it?
I wonder if that. I don't know enough about it, but I wonder if that happened recently and she chose to announce it at that point. Because it was a 6 a.m. press release, so very strange. And that happened also on the same day that the MP for a constituency called Makerfield, which is in the borough of Wigan, not too far from here, resigned as a way of offering his seat to Andy Burnham. That MP was someone called Josh Simons, who has been in place since 2024 election. He's quite young, 32 years old. And Andy Burnham then put out a letter saying that he would be asking permission from the NCC to run in that by-election.
NEC, isn't it?
Yes. Did I not say that?
I think you said NCC, didn't you? That's ours, yeah.
Yeah, there's too many acronyms. No, initialism's not an acronym, is it? Where are we at to?
Sorry.
So Andy Burnham, throw me off there. Andy Burnham has requested it. And the NEC has said we're not going to block him this time, which they did, if you remember, when he requested to stand for the Gorton and Denton by-election.
Indeed.
Which is interesting. And there seems to be this understanding now that there will be a Labour leadership election. Keir Starmer hasn't agreed to that, but it just seems to be sort of common understanding that, and where we're at is that if Burnham wins in Makerfield, he will then contest a Labour leadership election against Wes Streeting, potentially Angela Rayner. She's not declared. Wes Streeting has. And potentially Keir Starmer.
And potentially others, who knows?
Of course, yeah. Al Carnes has suggested he might run. He was newly elected MP in 2024, but has sort of climbed quite quickly into ministerial positions. And people like Ed Miliband have said that if there's nobody from sort of his wing of the party, he'll throw his hat in. I like Ed Miliband, and I'm going to put my fingers in my ears before you start shouting at me and all of the listeners turn off. But I can't help it. Maybe it's just nostalgia of like him eating a bacon sandwich, and he always gets attacked online for like silly things he does, and I just find him endearing. But there you go. We all have our faults. So a couple of things, and I want to run through a little bit about the by-election. But first, I just wanted to say, Wes Streeting, I don't agree with him a lot on politics, right? And what's funny is because in some ways people might think, okay, you're a social democrat. streeting must be around that, part in the political spectrum. But it just highlights the fact that the political spectrum kind of isn't fit for purpose anymore. And I think if Wes Streeting and I had a beer together, we'd quite quickly realise we disagree on so many different things.
I don't understand the difference between Wes Streeting and Keir Starmer, really. If you were replacing one with the other, what changes?
I would say that Wes Streeting is more firmly on the right of the Labour Party as a Blairite and a Blair successor, whereas Keir Starmer is someone that's kind of he's less ideological.
Okay.
And Keir Starmer he got elected on quite a left-wing platform as Labour leader, not as Prime Minister, as a successor to Corbyn, and then kind of ditched that quite quickly when he realised it was profitable to do so. Whereas Wes Streeting is more ideologically aligned to the right of the Labour Party, particularly when it comes to bringing the market into areas of the NHS. And as Health Secretary, he's had a plan to do that. And a lot of people would say that he's been successful in certain things, like getting waiting lists down. What I wanted to say about him is that it's a good example of, despite the fact that it's somebody I probably disagree with quite a lot in politics, he seems to have an idea of what he wants to do as Health Secretary. He's been put in that position in the Cabinet in 2024 after they've just won a landslide, and he's served less than 2 years. And even though it was sort of seen as, right, Wes Streeting's going to come in and really reform the NHS, quite quickly he's out and he's resigned because of a leadership election. And this isn't an attack on him. I think it's an attack on the short-termism of our politics, that so few ministers serve long tenures. And that's a real problem when you need people to come in with a vision and be able to stay in power, in position long enough to implement that vision. And that's the problem. Wherever you are on the political spectrum, left, right, you want to be able to see it work out so that you can judge them by that. Whereas we're not able to. And if you look at, the position of Health Secretary, I without looking up, I wouldn't know, but we've had so many since 2010, let's say, with these years of turbulence with ministers coming in and out. So that was something. Wes Streeting and all of this happens a lot with leadership elections, particularly when parties are in power, but the front runners are trying to find ways of sort of outlining their platform. And I think Angela Rayner spoke, I would like to say, at the CWU.
She did. I noticed that, yeah.
The Communications Workers Union.
Communication Workers Union, yeah.
I'm getting better.
You are getting better.
Wes Streeting spoke at, I think it's a think tank, isn't it, called Progress?
Yes.
And he outlined his... sorry, I shouldn't laugh because this is like serious politics, but I do sort of find it quite funny. He outlined his ambitious vision of rejoining the EU, which we can talk about a little bit in a second. But I thought that was really interesting, that that's what he thinks is the big idea. So anyway, what needs to happen before any Labour leadership election can happen, I would imagine, is for the Makerfield by-election to take place. Andy Burnham is in the prime position to be the Labour candidate, but that's not been announced yet because they're going to have a selection meeting on the 21st. And you'd imagine that he will be selected. I think they'd be crazy not to. Now, this seat, Makerfield, it was won, as I said,
Makerfield.
That's what I just said.
Oh, right. I thought it was Mayfield.
No, Makerfield. I just said it very fast. So it was won by Josh Simons in 2024 with that massive Labour landslide, but he only won it by 5,500 votes.
How many did the previous Gordon and Denton Labour?
13,000.
Right, okay.
I thought I'm never going to know the answer to this question, but luckily that's one I had in my head.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can see that out of those two, this was a much closer result, and particularly relevant is the person who finished second in that election, the Reform candidate Robert Kenyon, who it's being rumoured, and I'm pretty sure is the case, that he will be Reform's candidate for this upcoming by-election. Now, he got 31% of the vote to Josh Simons and Labour's 45%. But the big difference is, if you remember, the 2024 general election, Reform was not seen as a credible alternative, whereas now they've risen massively in the polls and they've gone up to around 30%, sort of dipped a bit more recently. So that suggests that this is a much, much harder seat to win for Andy Burnham than Gorton and Denton. And the MRP polling, MRP is where they look at the polling across the country for which party people support, and then try and map that onto a parliamentary election to see which seats would go to which party. That suggests that Reform would win quite comfortably.
I don't know if this has been very, very cynical, but do you not think that when West Streeting talks about rejoining the EU, the effect that would have in a big Remain town like Wigan would be to make sure Labour didn't win it? And was he not just making sure that Reform won?
I think that's a really astute point. I think that is quite possible.
Okay.
It is cynical, so perhaps it's not the case. But I think it has given Burnham the opportunity to come across as the pro-Brexit candidate, which would actually help him in many ways with a Labour Party that's wanting to win back over those Reform voters. But, as we know, the Labour membership is much more pro-Remain.
The Labour Party membership.
Membership,
yeah.
Just on that, 'cause maybe it's the right time to talk about it, but I we've talked about it in recent weeks. I just think what it does is it really highlights the lack of vision and ambition that our political elites have. They think, right, well, okay, we've tried this, tried that. What about, we try the EU again? And they talk about growth, and then you compare our meagre growth figures in the UK compared to you compare those with the EU figures or the prominent EU economies, and they're even worse.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
And you think this is their big idea?
Yeah.
To restart a conflict that is still fresh in the minds of many of us, where family members fell out over it, and it really divided the country. And a lot of people have accepted it and said, right, come on, let's move on. Let's do something now. Let's make the most of it, for better or worse. And they're wanting to restart these arguments. I think it's crazy.
Well, I think in some ways it's worse than that, because I think what the kind of already existing Labour government is doing by its reset agenda is to, by stealth, rejoin. So dynamic alignment, it means that, we accept the EU's legislation without that ever going to Parliament. We're accepting their standards on food, accepting their standards on things like animal husbandry and all those kind of things. And I do think that, people perhaps just need to wake up a bit to the fact that when they say reset, they are kind of meaning rejoin.
So why do you think West Streeting is putting forward this case to rejoin? They're going to rejoin anyway.
Well, it's interesting, because I think when you ask people what they want to do about the EU and do they think rejoining is a good idea, a lot of people will say yes. But it's important to note that the rules for Europe have changed a lot since we were in it. For example, you have to have the euro. We wouldn't have an opt-out from the euro if we rejoined. We wouldn't have the budgetary differences that we had last time. We'd have to be part of Schengen and free movement. So the terms on which we'll be going in would be actually even worse than the ones on which we came out. And I think if you make all that clear to people and then ask them again, do you want to rejoin the EU? You often get a very different answer. Do you remember that polling that Queen Mary University did that we talked to Richard Johnson about? That effectively showed that if you ask people about sovereignty, they actually really think that the UK should be a sovereign country. So, I think that's why West Streeting apart, there hasn't been a discussion about rejoining, because they're just trying to do it all under the cover of darkness, as it were.
Mm. I think one thing that, by West Streeting talking about this, it gives Andy Burnham the chance to push back against that and maybe benefit him in a quite a pro-Brexit seat, because I don't think Burnham will be tarnished with that if West Streeting says it, because he's seen as an opponent to Burnham. So I don't know. It remains to be seen. I want
Remains to be seen.
It remains.
Sorry.
It leaves to be seen. I want to run down, just go through the potential candidates and where the parties are sitting with this by-election.
Okay. And then can you do the time scale as well? Because that's the thing that's confusing me a bit. It seems like I'm going to have to wait forever to get all this sorted.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do that now. So we're recording this on the 18th of May. It's Monday. It is looking like the polling day will be on the 18th of June, so a month away from today. And I think, because they have the option of going slightly long, slightly short, there's a window with which they can do it. I imagine that they'll move the writ today in Parliament, which means then I think there is 48 hours before the Wigan Council have to offer nominations, which will then have a week.
Gosh, right, it's quick.
And then about 3 weeks election, so it's really fast. Most parties are selecting their candidates this week or have already done so. One of the first to announce was the Monster Raving Loony Party, so I give them a quick cursory nod. That's Howling Lord Hope will be their candidate.
Okay.
Restore Britain have announced, I believe today, their candidate is a local lady called Rebecca Shepherd. As I say, Reform I think will go for Robert Kenyon, who was their candidate last time out.
Because there was some discussion they might go for Maggie Oliver, wasn't there?
Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
I always think it's fair to give the person that has campaigned and worked hard to generate some support in that constituency another go.
Yeah.
And we'll come back to Restore Reform, but just quickly, Conservatives have said they'll fight this. They'll be a non-entity. In all fairness to the Conservatives, their candidate might be amazing and might prove me wrong, but I think this sort of seat, what's interesting is these post-industrial areas in the north, the sort of the red wall seats we talk about, they are likely to vote Reform, but not the Tories at all.
Agreed.
And that's quite interesting of the realignment of British politics. The Lib Dems will no doubt stand in this. Again, I think there'll be a non-entity. And the fight between Labour and Reform in the north is being mirrored in some areas in rural southern England between Conservatives and the Lib Dems. It's like the posh version down there. I can say that I'm from the south. The Green Party will no doubt run. Caroline Lucas has said that they should step aside to let Burnham have a go, have a free run of it on the left, because he supports proportional representation. I think the extent to which Burnham supports proportional representation is arguable.
Proportionate.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I think he's generally in Burnham is very much like Westminster's broken, we need to shake things up. I don't know how much conviction he has with that, and some of the answers he's given in the past about proportional representation, talking about the Greater Manchester mayoral election being proportional, is false because it's not PR. It used to have what's called supplementary votes, which means that you can rank candidates and you say, I give my first vote to this person, second vote to that, if the first isn't used, but it doesn't account for a proportional result in the way that other systems do. Anyway, that's a slight side point. The Greens arguing they should step aside certain people on the left. It's the same with Conservatives. So a couple of people, I believe Jacob Rees-Mogg and Edward Lee. Do you know Edward Lee?
I don't think I know that
father of
name.
the House. I'm not sure if he might still be actually father of the House. Old Conservative MP. Have both suggested that Conservatives should step aside for reform. Now, a lot of this is just noise, because I think it's pretty safe to say that no party will do that. And even from the outside, if people that are interested in politics think, oh, why aren't they stepping aside? If they did do that, they would anger a considerable amount of their number of their supporters. Mm-hmm. That even if you angered 1 in 10, you still wouldn't do it, because you're a political party, and the sort of the unwritten rule that you have signed up to and that you have agreed with your membership is that you will fight against other parties and put forward your vision. So it's never going to happen. Parties aren't going to stand aside. Certainly the big parties. We saw it happen with the Workers' Party in Gorton and Denton. They stepped aside and and I forgot the word that when you advocate for another party, you
Recommend.
no, it's
There's a word, isn't there?
Yeah, it's like presidential candidate. You
can't think of that
yeah.
word.
But anyway,
Sorry.
they did that, and I think that my impression, and this is from somebody that doesn't, outside of the Workers' Party, my suggestion is that they probably did that because they didn't have the resources to fight it. It wasn't an inspired decision where they said, we're going to do this out of the goodness of our hearts. So that's a bit about the different parties. I think it's safe to say it's going to be between Labour and Reform. But Restore have announced this candidate, and this is the first real chance to test Restore's membership of about 120,000. So Restore Britain, for anybody that doesn't know, is a party that started by Rupert Lowe, who was kicked out of Reform, which is to the right of Reform, and is a lot clearer and more hard line about certain issues like deportations. They've got considerable support, healthy membership, 120,000 people. But it's the first time, I think, that those members will be tested to see, are they happy for their party to stand a candidate and potentially stop Reform from winning? Now, my perspective, and I've made this clear in the past, is if you're a political party, stand a candidate. And voters should vote for who they want.
Yeah.
And all this nonsense about splitting the vote, I think, is silly. But I'm already seeing a bit from Restore Britain supporters saying, I'm not happy about this. It's a chance that they're going to allow Andy Burnham to win. So we'll see how much that actually takes up in the coming days and weeks. One other thing that I wanted to mention is the sort of gossip, the Daily Mail stuff of the last couple of days. So there was a post by quite a big Twitter account, 220,000 followers, a guy called Chris Rose, who's a Reform supporter. He said, this is hilarious. The Daily Mail has revealed that Andy Burnham was jogging at 12:18 p.m. Then he returned home 45 minutes in his VW Golf. His jog was just a photo op. Why pretend to jog? It just makes him look fake and untrustworthy, something that public hate about politics. Now, I've seen this a lot of, and Andy Burnham was saying, they doorstep me, the press. I'm going out for my daily jog, and people were saying, there's no way he runs. You can tell by the way he's running and stuff. Now, I have a friend that lives just down the road from Andy Burnham, and he regularly sees him running, and he often waves at him. And why this is relevant is that it's one of those occasions where your real life experience validates something that people online and the press are clearly false about. And I think that tells us that when we read stuff online, we should take it with a bit of a pinch of salt. And when you see something like Andy Burnham out for a jog and you think, oh, this is just a politician trying to look a certain way, you might not realise that actually he does that all the time.
And presumably he was coming back in his car. Potentially he was jogging to pick up his car that he'd left somewhere because he went for a drink. I do that sometimes, leave the car and then run back for it the day after.
Exactly. But in light of the fact that you and I are trying to heighten political dialogue and not just make it about the lowest common denominator, I thought it worth mentioning.
Okay.
Now, lastly then, listeners will know that you and I are members of the SDP, Social Democratic Party, and they'll be keen to know, what do we think about the by-election? Are we going to stand?
Yeah.
We've been talking about it the last couple of days.
Yes.
So what do you think? It's a difficult one for a party like ours, where I stood in Gorton and Denton and got 46 votes. Yeah. And we can generate some interest and some publicity, but at the end of the day, people are going to feel like they need to vote for one of the two candidates that is likely to win.
Yeah. It's a question of whether standing and receiving a potentially embarrassingly small number of votes is good or bad for the party, isn't it? And I kind of think what's good or bad is the campaign rather than necessarily the number of votes. Which is not to say that it wouldn't be great to stand a candidate and win by having the most number of votes, which clearly it is not going to happen. But it feels to me that if you are a political party, you should stand candidates. I was reflecting, I don't watch the Eurovision Song Contest, but I noticed that the UK entry again received, was it one vote?
Yes,
they get
I
one
think
in the
they
end.
did, yeah.
So it wasn't quite null point, but it was very close to. And it's almost the same, isn't it? That they wouldn't say from that we're not going to put a competitor in next time. You need to have somebody in the race, and so it feels that it is the right thing to do to stand, even if you will get a very small number of votes, but you have the opportunity to test your ideas out on the public, either face to face or in a kind of virtual way through social media and other platforms, that you do get that chance to put forward the SDP message, and to not use an opportunity like this to do that feels a bit wrong to me.
I feel sometimes that when we campaign, we, on the ground, being part of that, process for that few weeks, we judge ourselves by how well we've campaigned and by conversations that we've had with people, the things we've put out online and the reaction that's received. And then the vote to us, often when that we're not going to win in that election, like in Gorton and Denton, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to win.
Good, yeah.
I'm not judging myself by that, but everybody else does. And from the external facing, and from people, friends of mine or from the media, they sort of go, oh, the SDP only got this number of votes. And I think it's almost like judging, Premier League players by the number of votes they receive for PFA Player of the Year, rather than what you thought of their importance on the field, of their significance within the team. And so I feel that we do have a duty as a party to put our vision across, and there will be plenty of people in Makerfield, in that constituency, that are susceptible to the SDP message, because it is something that cuts across. In a seat like that, I think it's that post-industrial part of the country where they have seen the effects of deindustrialisation, something that Burnham has been talking about recently, but have also felt the impacts of immigration in a negative way, and they can see that there is a sensible sort of common sense vision to be seized. But you either have a Labour Party with Burnham as its candidate that is really out of touch with them. I was listening to an interview he did 9 years ago when he's talking about Brexit and respecting the result and everything. And I thought he's so out of touch with so much of the Labour Party at that time. Diane Abbott was criticising him because he said that people in Burnley, for example, are right to feel that they have been impacted negatively by immigration because it suppresses wages and stuff. And I was thinking, wow, he is out of touch with the Labour Party, and I don't see how even if we think he's sincere in dealing with these things, I don't think that he's going to be able to enact any of those changes as the leader of a party which is just so out of touch and has been for so long. And then on the reform side, they seize upon an issue like immigration and meet the country where a lot of the people are at in terms of how they feel about it, but then have no solution, have no vision, have no idea about how to rectify the problems that have impacted these constituents. And so I feel that there is something that the SDP can do in voicing that and giving it a good shot.
Yeah, it feels to me that reform, I think you'd say something along the lines of they survive on the vibes, don't they? They don't seem to have any kind of real plan for government. And, you'd think that the people of Makerfield kind of deserve a bit more than that, a bit better than that.
Absolutely.
Can we just go back to that timeline? So you were saying that the by-election could all be over by the 18th of June.
Yeah.
And then what happens then? Does that then... What, Starmer doesn't resign, and then what happens then? How do you have election?
Labour leadership rules are different to the Conservative Party, where you have to parliamentary members will put in a letter anonymously to the 1922 committee. Conservative Party. Labour Party, it's not so clear to me. It seems like there have to be 81 people putting forward a particular candidate for an election, and then the NEC has to sign off on an election process. But I'd imagine at that point, if Burnham wins in Makerfield, then Keir Starmer would agree to an election process, and whether he stands or not, I can't see him standing. I think when you've been Prime Minister and there's that much dislike. I was trying to be a little bit kinder. Hatred for your leadership from so much of the country. I think at that point he says, okay, fair enough, I'll step back.
So, I mean, the reason I ask is just because, for this whole period, the leadership of the country is effectively absent, isn't it? I mean, Keir Starmer feels like a leader in name only, and everybody's going to be obsessed with, this election, and who's concentrating on the house building.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I think a lot of people have criticised the fact that the hubris of these two men, Josh Simons and Andy Burnham, for conspiring to just hand Andy Burnham a seat. And I don't agree with that, because I think that is the setup. Like, that's how it is, right? And if Andy Burnham thinks, I could do a better job, this is my opportunity. Yeah. And you've got someone like Josh Simons that says, I'm happy to step aside. I really wouldn't be surprised if Josh Simons is being lined up as the mayoral candidate. He says he wouldn't. He's not, but
okay.
And I think that's fair enough. That is that. Don't hate the player, hate the game, right?
Yeah.
And we need to do that a bit more. We need to hate the game a little bit more. And to say, this probably is a silly way of doing things, and we probably do need electoral reform, for example. And it does seem a strange way to be choosing the next Prime Minister. But that's the way it is. And I don't think that, your point that there's sort of an absence of leadership during this process, but that's so often the case. We had 2 years of Rishi Sunak when we knew that he was going to lose the election. And it is just the idiosyncrasies of the British electoral system, which probably needs changing. And a little bit of disruption isn't a bad thing, and I think we're going to get a lot of disruption. We already are. And it's a strange time for politics, but you and I have talked so many times on the podcast about the new political alignment and when that starts to come through. And at the moment we're judging, like the media and the public, we are judging the five main parties and the characters, the personalities within those parties against the current system and who's got the best ideas and such. But realistically, I think we'll look back in a couple of years from now and realise that nobody really had any ideas because they couldn't foresee what was coming. And I think it's incumbent on those of us, like, us in the STP, to be putting forward new ideas and to be aspiring to a better form of politics.
Good. Well, on that note, onwards and upwards.
Indeed.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. As always, do recommend us to your friends. And we will see you again next week.
Thanks for listening.